Hello everyone, it's Kym here from East Forged. I'd like to begin our interview by acknowledging the Yugara and Turrbal people, the traditional owners of the place where I am today in Brisbane, Queensland. I'd also like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And I would like to extend my acknowledgement to the traditional owners right across the country and the world, wherever you are listening to this interview today. So today we are very pleased to have an international guest for our blog, Evelyn Chick. Tanya and I came across Evelyn at a digital event produced by the Tales of the Cocktail Foundation this year. There was one particular masterclass that caught my eye, which was called Zero Proof 101. And that's where Evelyn was taking that masterclass. We were drawn to Evelyn's industry experience as a bartender and a bar consultant, and her personal interest in seeing bars develop inclusive service for customers that may be moderating or abstaining from alcohol. And as flavour geeks ourselves, it was the approach to the development of zero-proof drinks that made her someone we were very keen to chat with. And we are really grateful that she has agreed to join us today. We're going to cover 3 topics with Evelyn today. We're just going to look at the role of non-alcoholic drinks in providing a solution for those encountering drinking-related anxiety, sometimes also known as hangxiety or after-party regret. We're going to ask Evelyn a little bit about the low and no alcohol scene in Canada. And we know Evelyn's a bit of a passionate tea enthusiast, as are we. And we want to ask her a little bit more about how she incorporates these ingredients and tisane in botanicals into modern alcohol-free drinks that can be enjoyed in the home. So before we get started, I'm just going to hand over to Evelyn to introduce herself and what she's up to these days. And maybe if she can give us a little bit of an idea of how she's fallen into this non-alcoholic drinks or zero-proof drinks.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Kym. And I'm very excited that we got to connect over a virtual event. The world is constantly changing. So
Absolutely.
It's really nice to connect with people actually across the globe, a lot easier, it seems. So my name is Evelyn Chick, and I'm the founder of Evelyn Chick Projects.com, which is a creative hub for drink enthusiasts. So on my website, there's actually a plethora of non-alcoholic mixers and non-alcoholic serves that are easily executable at home. And I'm also a beverage director for a hospitality group in Toronto and in Vancouver called the Donnelly Group. So in terms of kind of designing bar programs and designing drink menus, I've been doing that for about 13 years now, Which is quite a long time. Yeah, and I feel like the trends around the drinks industry have sort of gone full circle almost. You always see sort of the same trends come back and forth. And I think a trend or, a new kind of style and a new way of drinking isn't necessarily going to go away, which is the low and no ABV serves. And through sort of designing bar programs and doing a lot of media appearances in the last few years, there's just been a huge interest in those particular serves because a lot of the younger generation is getting into the sort of health and wellness trends that you see on social media. And, with so many different non-alcoholic spirit alternatives, non-alcoholic tea and beer alternatives coming up, it's just sort of a natural progression, not to not drink or not imbibe, but just to provide better and more options for the consumers out there.
Yeah, it's certainly an area that's just sort of taking off here in Australia. And when we look to other more mature markets such as Canada and the UK as well, just the number of drinking options that are non-alcoholic is I think you might have mentioned in your masterclass, I think since 2015, the number of brands that have come on was 50 or something.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, it's
yeah, and that statistic I pulled about a year ago.
Wow.
So even the last year on its own, a lot of international brands have popped up.
Which is obviously great for someone like yourself looking to bring new ideas into the bars and also for the home as well, which we'll get onto. So this idea about hangover anxiety or hangxiety and after party regret, It's something that we hear our community talk about in terms of why they might be looking to moderate or abstain from drinking or not taking part in imbibing, as you sort of mentioned. Really just like to hear your thoughts about the role of bars in providing options.
So I think in terms of creating options for um, a bar scene, or even an event scene, or anything that has to do with curating a social experience, you sort of have to look at how many groups and how many guests you can, we call it touches, how many guests you can touch per experience. So
Right.
for myself, because I curate bar programs for multiple venues, you sort of have to look at it like you're not trying to win over those guests that are already into cocktails, already into alcohol serves. You're trying to create a space where people from all walks of life, whether or not they are your particular demographic, can walk in and feel welcome and feel inclusive. And I think that's a big part of inclusivity. And in terms of sort of anxiety and, you know, that kind of mental space that a lot of people do get into, I mean, this is probably the best time to talk about it because the world is so uncertain. So
Absolutely.
anything that has to do, you know, with an alcohol serve that kind of changes your perspective on things. Obviously, it alters your mental state after a little bit. It kind of almost elevates the, like, that little bit of anxiety, whether or not you're imbibing a lot or you're just kind of dabbling. So I think just providing that non-alcoholic serve option will help also moderate drinking, still provide that experience that you need, because we're naturally social people. So, you know, when you take away your community spaces, or when you make community spaces, at least in Canada right now, everything's shut down because of the pandemic.
Yes, yeah.
um, when you're providing this sort of community space, people are making a very informed, making a very unique choice to go visit your establishment. So you just want to make sure that whatever you're offering is universal and global and inclusive.
And how does that sort of translate, I guess, into the home and being a good host in your home? Do you see that there is an interest, particularly with the work that you're doing with your sort of in-home cocktails program? Do you see people are interested in non-alcoholic drinks as equally as going out for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, why it hasn't caught on so much previously is because it seems very unapproachable, and it seems like there were not as many options out there to just sort of mix something at home. And again, when I was speaking about wellness and health, a lot of people are actually cutting down on sugars and sort of artificial flavors. So when you look at, you know, especially in North America, there's a lot of very high sugar content, high artificial coloring, high artificial flavor serves out there. So with my sort of online presence and online classes, I try to, even if I'm doing a master class on spirits, to speak about a non-alcoholic option for that
Ah,
particular serve,
right.
and kind of just get people thinking about different ways they can actually execute these cocktails that we pay so much attention to when it contains alcohol, but also kind of give them an option that is pretty much very approachable, and ingredients that are easy to find, especially in your local grocery store, or, you know, a local farmer's market, because we're trying to support local businesses, things that you can just pick up and whip up at home. So I think, again, it's just providing that option and giving a little bit of guidance as to how they can approach it.
It's fantastic. And we'll come on a little bit more later to the actual development of those drinks because I really love the way your mind works and how you break it down. So that's great. Um, I guess just on that last, touching on those last points, what are is there any sort of way to categorize the options for consumers that may not be imbibing these days in terms of what they might be able to look out for in the bars for non-alcoholic options?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such an interesting, like, way to put it, because in my seminar at Tales of Cocktail, I actually talk about language a lot.
Yeah.
So We can call it non-alcoholic or zero proof or, temperance or, whatever you want to call that particular category of drinks. And I sort of spoke about how the word mocktail is a little bit outdated.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I love that point, and I always keep bringing it up because I think mocktails have a certain stigma behind it, and it kind of isolates the individual who may not be imbibing in that particular situation. So I like calling it that particular thing. So say, for example, I work with seed-lip non-alcoholic distillate quite a bit, and it's essentially a almost like how you would distill an aerosol or a perfume, where it is distilled like a spirit, but it's de-alcoholized after. So all those beautiful herbs and flavors remain in that particular distillate, and it kind of just takes a little bit of working with to understand how those flavors come out. So non-alcoholic distillates would be sort of a category you can look for. Non-alcoholic beer, tea infusions. I spoke a little bit about, if you haven't seen, for those of you who are watching my
Yeah.
seminar.
Go and have a look. Definitely. We'll link to it
We'll put
too.
the link there. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are actually a lot of concentrates out there and really interesting tonics that are out in the market right now. Things like kombucha, anything that's fermented, is also really interesting. But I would just definitely be careful of the percentage of ABV, which is alcohol by volume. That is within those particular ferments, because sometimes when it does ferment a little bit longer, the alcohol content can go up. So there's so many different categories of non-alcoholic serves you can look for. I think it just kind of depends on what your flavor profile is and what you're gravitated towards.
Absolutely. No, I think it's very exciting, and it's great to be able to break it down like that. And it just makes it more approachable, I think, for people when they do get into the situation where they're looking at a menu and they can start to work out exactly what they're looking at, and where the base of a lot of these drinks are coming from. And I really loved your point there about the terminology. I think it definitely exists in this non-alcoholic space and where drinks are emerging, but we also find even the words around sort of the product that we produce, which is a nitrogen infused sparkling cold brew tea. If we refer to it as iced tea, it also comes with some connotations of very high sugar and things like that. So it's important, the language, I think, that we use going forward to make sure we represent these drinks correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, well, let's move on to the second question then, because as I mentioned before, in Australia and particularly, I guess, we've seen an emergence of this category of drinks, and our community is small, but they're very passionate in terms of low and no alcohol. What have you found in Canada and Toronto, particularly where you are? We'd love to hear how we sort of stack up against the rest of the world.
It's actually interesting because a few years ago, I want to say a few years ago, I think all the time just sort of meshes together now, but
Absolutely.
The terminology, sober curious, and the different months that people choose not to imbibe. So sober October, and then it became sober November and sober January. So there's a lot of curiosity around it. And I don't remember a particular aha moment when I realized that the industry is really caught on, but I know that at my previous bar, Pretty Ugly Bar, which has now been permanently shut, unfortunately, just because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
It happens, but we went out on a high note for sure. So,
That's good.
yeah. So, in terms of curating that particular bar program, we always sort of look for things that are coming up and coming, I think, based out of different markets. So that's around the time that the non-alcoholic distillate started popping up in our market. So
right.
I was mentioning before, Seedlip was a non-alcoholic distillate that's based out of the UK. And around those that particular couple years, one of the pretty big new non-alcoholic beer companies called Partake started coming up with not only non-alcoholic lagers, but they did a blonde ale and a stout and a sort of like a more like New England style pale ale. So all these different things weren't particularly explored before. And that's also the phase where a lot of juice companies started producing kombucha. So I felt like it almost was like a domino effect of really good products that started coming out. And
Right.
then the bartending community followed in that sort of market trend. And we started creating and really thinking about what it means to create something that is not only a mocktail, but a really well thought out non-alcoholic serve. So
Wow.
I think it's very sort of uh, it's great in terms of timing how all happened, and there's a few
Absolutely.
great bars that really started perpetuating that movement.
Wow. Okay. Evelyn, just on your point there about bartenders picking up on these great products coming into the market, do you feel that that was um, your your community being leading that, or do you think it was a bit of both? Bartenders also being interested in providing those options in that in with those drinks.
I think similarly to Australia, our bar community is pretty tight knit. It's a small community, but because it is still, Canada, and Canada is a little bit behind, I would say Europe and the US in terms of trends and at least getting the products within our particular market. So that community really perpetuates movement whenever something comes in. So I think we started, like the bar community started exploring that category, and then you see the consumer interest start rising. And we're really lucky to have a few really great drinks writers in our community as well.
Ah,
And
okay.
they kind of start talking about the trend, especially when it comes to the months leading up to holidays, when there's another particular tie-in. So say if you want to save money for the holidays, or you want to save your liver for the holidays, whatever
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is,
absolutely.
they have a hook to sort of connect what we've discovered in the bar community with the consumer base. So I think it's a joint effort of everyone just having interest in that particular category, and you can really see it growing after a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I did touch on it a little bit earlier, but obviously this is what's been seen in the bars, and but we're spending a lot of time in our homes at the moment.
Mhm.
Again, is it something that you think people are looking for more? Are more people sort of approaching you in terms of those? I know you mentioned that you offer those options for everybody when they come into your programs, online programs, but yeah, what's the appetite, I guess, that you're sort of seeing there?
I think more and more people are finding out about these different options that I was mentioning earlier, and there definitely is a desire for non-alcoholic serves. There's a huge sort of shift in terms of people really worrying about the mental health status of everybody because they're so cooped up at home, and
Absolutely.
previously it's just drink till you forget. But I think that mentality is sort of shifted
Yeah,
because like we have to sort of preserve our health, especially right now, and also think about sort of the long-term effects it has to a person's like emotions and mental stability when it comes to just kind of looking at whether or not you can still enjoy your experiences at home, making it interesting, but not just going to the bottle. So I think
yeah.
that the desire is definitely there. And it's really nice to see that this is not something that's stopping, or the non-alcoholic desire is not stopping. It's just growing because more products are popping up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those trends. I think that the more data that's coming out, it's demonstrating that there are more people that are turning to this as an option. So it's very
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah, and especially with holiday hosting too. Obviously, the holiday season coming
Yes.
up. I think kind of promoting moderation and promoting that sort of lifestyle of a little bit just kind of looking after your health and looking after others is quite significant right now. So a lot of
Absolutely.
people have actually asked me, okay, what is this? What can I do at home in terms of a host, even for my small group of a bubble of six or a bubble of
Yeah.
10, whatnot, to make sure that everyone still has a nice time and it's something special and they don't feel left out.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting. And I think, particularly as you mentioned in the holidays, they sometimes with alcohol it can fuel this idea of great, like enhancing that anxiety that we spoke about, and situations can arise with family. And I think just having those options and having exciting options and something interesting for people to talk about it just sort of enables that situation to diffuse and everyone to enjoy themselves those times that we are getting to spend together. So that's really great to hear. I think we're still a little bit behind Canada, but I feel that, again, we're seeing in our market, probably particularly being driven, Seedlip is clearly one of the pioneers in this space, and that's been great for a lot of other makers. But we are seeing a lot of our craft breweries, and in Australia we do love our craft beer.
Yeah.
But that, again, what you've mentioned, we're witnessing too right now. So that's very exciting in terms of if we're going to continue following that trajectory, we might be a bit further advanced going forward. So yeah, it's great.
Good. That's very good to hear.
Yeah.
And Australia does have very good craft breweries. So I'm guessing at some point they'll come up with really good non-alcoholic beers as well.
Yes, yeah, it's certainly emerging. So we're going to move on to our last topic, which is the one I'm most excited about. Particularly, I think coming both Tanya and I are what we call flavor explorers, I guess is the best terminology. We love.
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. We used to call ourselves flavor nerds, but I think it's a little bit more. It's a bit more than that. It's bringing together sort of our experiences with different ingredients and botanicals and meshing them together, and being quite innovative in that space. So we have a common interest in this exploration of flavors. So I'd love to know, like, what's your connection with tea? Because you do seem to like utilizing that ingredient, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I grew up in Hong Kong, so that's a crazy, that's a culture that really takes into their love of tea very seriously. So as a child, I've known how to sort of brew different styles of tea, how many times you have to steep it, when you have to pour it out, the temperature of the water that you have to put in for each particular blend and whatnot. So I thank my mom for that. She loves tea. I think that's a very nostalgic thing for me to constantly connect to. And obviously with growing up in Hong Kong, like the Asian flavors exposed to is very different than a lot of the ones in North America now. But I also find the tea category fascinating because, for those who are just used to having the black tea in the morning, and then their, English breakfast or whatnot, they put milk and sugar in. That's sort of how people think of tea, but there's so many different types. There's, your herbals, you have your red, your white, your yellow, your greens, and even within greens in any particular country, it's completely different, and how they toast it, how they dry it, how they do different things. It's fascinating to me. So I love working with it just because of the diversity and the flavor profile that you can find in teas. And it doesn't just have to be fruit or dark or rooty or citrus forward. It could be like very savory as well. So I think it kind of covers all the flavor profiles that you can taste.
Yeah. Yeah, I love hearing that. When in your previous work in the bar, was it tea an ingredient that you would utilize, and is it an easy ingredient to utilize? Because I know some of the teas we can get very complicated with it from a Chinese brewing perspective. But is it a liked ingredient by bartenders, I guess, is probably the question.
Yeah, I think in the craft cocktail industry, teas are utilized quite often, but I think a lot of the interest comes from infusing an alcoholic beverage with teas to begin with, or infusing it in a simple syrup. And as I was mentioning before, a lot of people are sort of steering away from having things that are high in sugar, or trying to get something that is a little bit more natural in their kind of drink cycle or drink trends is up and coming. So I would say that the interest in the bartending community definitely stems from infusions and particularly with alcohol. So when I was creating different tea serves, I definitely had to look into lots of different factors because if you're doing it without alcohol in a non-alcoholic serve, the stability of the particular tea is so different. So say if you were to infuse something in alcohol, the flavor would probably stay quite well. And depending on what you're steeping it in, you don't really get the crazy amount of tannins that you would unless if you like how you would oversteep a tea, like when you're doing it with water or a simple syrup. So I think in exploring that category, a lot of bartenders do tend to stick to tea infusions with alcohol or simple syrups, which I think is fantastic because that's a really great way to get some flavors into a cocktail that is a little bit more complex than just the base ingredient. So if you were to say do a pomegranate rooibos tea versus just a pomegranate syrup. Again, that would be a little bit more complex as a base ingredient, so that would contribute to a full of flavor cocktail without having to do much with the others.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Fantastic.
in terms of non-alcoholic tea making, it's definitely a much, much more complex thing to deal with.
Yeah. I do like how you've put that though, because I think people, there is a level of like understanding that needs to come, I think, when you are working with tea in a non-alcoholic capacity because of those reasons that you mentioned. So that's really, really interesting. How do you think we can hero tea more with our non-alcoholic drinks? And I'd really like to bring this back to people working with the ingredient in the home, because I know that you're about accessibility for approaching these drinks as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
I think it's more just education. So I'm very lucky that I've gotten quite a bit of experience working with people who are very good with tea. Like I wouldn't say particularly that I'm a tea expert. I really love the flavor profile, but there are a lot of local tea purveyors that I would definitely recommend if you are interested in non-alcoholic serves to just chat with, because as you know, people who enjoy tea love talking about it. So
That is so
I think
true.
it's mostly just, chatting with them about it because they are the ones who understand sort of what ingredients that go in it that makes that particular blend so special. So in terms of people at home, usually when I do cocktail classes, I try to relate whatever I'm making to something that they're very used to. So say, for example, if I were to make a non-alcoholic tea lemonade, then I would kind of explain it in a way where, okay, this is kind of how you steep your regular English breakfast, but in this particular serve, this is how much more you have to put in and how much shorter of a time you have to do. So it kind of cuts off before all the tannins come out, and tannins means bitterness. So have you ever tasted something where you're like, oh, this is kind of bitter and I don't know why? So kind of explaining it and breaking it down in a way where they can relate to. And I think that's why I find success in a lot of virtual home classes, because I'm able to sort of break it down and talk about it in a language that they understand. And I feel like all this kind of comes back to inclusivity, and hence, the full circleness of this particular category is because at one point or another in our lives, we've definitely have had non-alcoholic drinks, but is it as well thought out and as complex as we try to make it now? Probably not,
Yeah, absolutely. It's evolving in that way, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's just about relatability and being able to explain it in a way where the language is approachable and global. So
Fantastic. No, I love that. And I guess our final question for you today, and what we wanted to really draw out is your expertise, I guess. But we'd love to know some of your top tips for creating a well-balanced tea, zero proof drink in the home.
right. So my tip and only tip ever that I tell everybody is pick something you like, because the craziest thing, it's such a simple thing, but a lot of flavors that people particularly experience that they love, they're not sure why. And I think they just gravitate towards the same things because of familiarity. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So I would always say, start with something you like. So if you don't particularly like the flavor of black tea and you prefer green or something, I would definitely pick that first. And another thing about teas is you have to understand the ingredient. So again, if you oversteep something, it's going to be a little bit more bitter, or if you don't add enough of the leaves in the particular blend. So say like for herbal, you add a little bit more grams of that particular blend because it takes a little bit more time and it takes a little bit more of the ingredient to actually get the flavors to pop. So understanding the ingredients, very important. And look at tea like how you would look at elongating your drink. So I wouldn't say look at it like it is something that you can use as a base just as is. So say if you alter the properties of it, and in my Tales of the Cocktail seminar that I'm really glad you're putting the link up on because I don't even know that it's up, so it's perfect.
It is. I watched it again last night.
Yeah, thank you. But I talk about tea concentrates. So what I do with kind of utilizing those really beautiful tea flavors as a base ingredient for a non-alcoholic drink, I would steep the tea how the purveyor or the tea maker would recommend, and I would reduce it to strengthen the flavor. So that way you're not actually altering what the recommended method to brew the tea is, and preserve all those beautiful flavors that they're intended to be in. So now if you alter the texture and the strength of the tea, then you can start using it as a base for your non-alcoholic drink. So for example, if you were to make, I always go back to lemonade because it's just the easiest thing. Everyone knows what it is.
That's it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And we're coming into summer here, so
oh yeah, perfect.
Gonna love it.
We're just going right into winter.
I
So
know.
my tea cocktails have actually been really, really popular on my Instagram feed. Yeah, so on my Instagram feed at Evelyn Chick, I've put up some beautiful sort of fall hot drink cocktails, and it kind of includes a bunch of tea recipes. So definitely go check it out.
Wow,
but in terms of going into summer and you're looking to do a non-alcoholic serve that's a little bit more interesting, a lemonade base is great, and you don't necessarily have to use white sugar or simple syrup as a sugar additive. So if you just alter that sugar additive a little bit, say using natural honey, and I'm sure there's lots in Australia. It's really good honey in Australia.
Yeah.
Or in Canada, we do maple syrup or agave, or something that's a little bit more natural that you can pick up with a little bit of citrus. And again, it doesn't need to be lemon. It could be, yuzu or kumquats or something that's a little bit more acidic and floral. You can use the tea as a lengthener, how you would say soda or, pop or water. That kind of lengthens the drink, and that adds another dimension. So if you were to say build a summer forward lemonade for your backyard party, and you mix together some honey and some lemon, and you kind of think about, I always think about drinks like how I would creating a dish. So what goes well with honey? I know cantaloupes do, and pretty much like mint or strawberries or whatnot, like all that kind of goes with it. I would probably go with a tea that's a little bit lighter and brighter, like a white tea or a fruit tea or something like that. And if you were in Canada and you are going into about 2 degrees Celsius, I would probably pick something that's a little bit more warming, like a chai paired with maybe an orange marmalade, and like throw some sage in it, So you're kind of looking at it like how you would create a dish, and looking at flavors that may or may not be very similar to each other, but can complement each other in terms of flavor. So I think a lot of it is just, again, like breaking down the ingredients and looking at the associative ingredients. And I think, the third tip is just to make sure your mind is open and you're being creative and having fun.
Fantastic. I love it. I love it. There's some really great tips there. And I can't say enough. Go and have a look at Evelyn's Instagram feed. There is an amazing drink I think you put up there the other day called matcha.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
It's amazing. It is so much fun, and I think it just shows I guess the way that you approach your drink making and bringing that element of interest into it. So yeah, it's great. Evelyn, thank you so much for your time today. I think that really covers everything that we really wanted to talk to you about, and there's been some really great tips and about creating zero proof drinks or non-alcoholic drinks, and I think it's certainly a very exciting category